Hello, not worry. I will information on the webinar. There is a ahead and get started. Okay. Okay. North Dakota Post-Adopt Coordinator for the western side of the state. I have been working with Post-Adopt since March of 2019, so a little over a year. Prior to coming to work at Post-Adopt, I worked at a local nonprofit here in Bismarck for 3 years, working with at-risk, homeless, trafficked, struggling youth and their families. And in total, I have 5 years experience working in the child welfare system. That's where I'm very passionate about. I was born and raised in Mandan, North Dakota, and I am a mother of 2 beautiful children. So the webinar today is really going to focus on, it's just a 101 and some really basic information about the collaborative problem solving approach. This approach was created by Dr. Ablon, and it's actually based out of Massachusetts General Hospital. And if you do have more information or want to learn more about this collaborative problem solving approach and Dr. Ablon, there will be links at the end that you can click. You should be able to click and you can get more information on that. Or if you want to I can send you more information if you want to email me or have that in the questions, and I will absolutely send you more information if you have any other questions. So really the core of this is kind of trying to shift people's ideas of what parenting is like, because I think that we've all had this idea that of a very conventional way of parenting, and really the core of this approach is to try to shift your gear a little bit and know that yes, our traditional ways of parenting can be effective, but for kids who are specifically really challenging, we will actually see an adverse effect. So this is really giving you some tips on how to help those challenging behaviors of those kiddos and just kind of shift your parenting in general. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to launch a poll just to get a little bit of feedback from you guys and see. So this poll is true. Go ahead and click that. False. Go ahead. If you're not sure or you're kind of neutral on it, go ahead and click neutral. Okay. Wow. You guys are quick. You got all your answers in. I will go ahead and close that up. And it looks like all of you are geniuses and you all got it correct by marking false. And thank you for that. You know, you guys probably now have more collaborative, you probably know more than you think, actually, if you do hold those beliefs, and I appreciate your guys' interactions. Okay. So what Dr. Ablon is saying is really kids who are struggling with those challenging behaviors, it oftentimes turns into conventional blame gaming, right? So kids who are struggling, you see a lot of those behaviors in school. Oftentimes, teachers kind of place the blame on those parents, right? So parents are too passive or too dismissive. They're too inconsistent. They don't provide enough structure at home. And some examples that may sound familiar to you if you have some challenging kids, or you might have heard them yourself as a child. So it's saying Lucy doesn't get her homework done. Lucy could get her homework done, if her parents would hold her more accountable. Carter would pay better attention in school if his parents would limit his electronics and social media in the home. Johnny could do better in school if he had more structure in the home. So that's a lot of feedback that you get from that school and a lot of pressure on those parents. And on the flip side, you know, parents might say that, parents might view teachers as being too rigid or too mean, too inconsistent, having too high of expectations for kids. And some examples of that is Paul is falling behind in school because teachers keep putting him in detention. Haley is struggling to get her work done because teachers aren't giving her that one-on-one time that she really needs. And really at the core of this, it's an conventional blame game that's not really helpful, and oftentimes it puts that kid in the middle there. So with all this more conventional wisdom is kids learn to use behaviors to get things or to avoid things, right? That's a traditional way of viewing kids. And if you hold that mentality and believe that to be true, a lot of times what kids are going to be labeled as are lazy, defiant, disrespectful, manipulative, argumentative. Like all of those things often get put on the kid, right? People don't understand where these behaviors are coming from, and then they get these labels. And really, this is a risky thing to do by putting these labels on a kiddo, because then ultimately what it can lead to is self-fulfilling prophecy. What a self-fulfilling prophecy really is beliefs about a kid and them ending up like they're hearing that they're manipulative, they're disruptive, they're disrespectful. And what they actually do is internalize that, and then they hold those beliefs about themselves, right? So that's going to influence those expectations. They're not going to be willing or interested in meeting those expectations because they don't have that internal drive, because they think they're lazy, they're manipulative, they're defiant, right? And what that does is it ultimately influences that negative behavior, right? That lying, that aggression, that anger. And what that's going to do is get you to similar behavioral results. And ultimately it goes full circle. So it's pretty risky to put those labels on those kiddos, because it really does impact how they see themselves and ultimately the results that they get. They're going to lose those drives to do better. So when I say traditional types of parenting and interventions, the big fancy word for that is operant conditioning. This is really at the core of Psychology 101. And what it is, it's the belief that if you provide, like, if you have a behavior that you want changed or altered, you could either respond to it in a positive reinforcement way or a negative reinforcement way. And positive reinforcement meaning, like, if a kiddo does a good behavior, they get rewarded with treats, privileges, allowance, you use sticker charts, right? So that's the positive reinforcement side. And that hope is to reinforce that behavior, right? What negative reinforcement is really responding to those negative behaviors. So, right, if they are disrespectful, if they are defiant, we're going to respond with a negative reinforcement in hopes to decrease that negative behavior. And that's where you get the timeout, the corporal punishment, the grounding, and all of that. So really, there's tons of studies that show that this is an effective way to change behavior, specifically in dogs and rats. But as humans, we are far more complex human beings. So like I said, it can be an effective way to help with behaviors for some kids, but with these with these really challenging kids, this is actually not an effective approach for those kids, because you're going to get the opposite effect. I'm going to do another quick poll. Just give me a second here. Okay, I am launching it now. It's distributing, and I will give you just a minute here to answer your question, and then I will close it and share the results. Testing your knowledge today. Okay. Okay, so what I have here is 67% of the times you guys are saying that works, or 67% of you is saying some of the time that works. 33% is saying most of the time. And I think that those are very accurate and fair things. So good job, guys. I appreciate, again, your interaction with this. I close that out. All right. So with that traditional type of parenting, we'll go over some of those pros, which initially it increases desired behavior or decreases desired behavior, right? Like I think back to when my kids were younger and I wanted to provide, like, I had a sticker chart, right? Initially it was really fun, it was really exciting, and the kids were really motivated. But I have to tell you, after a week and a half, it lost its excitement, right? Or either I forget to do it or they forget about it. So it's really initially that type of intervention can be really helpful for kids, but it's really not proven to be a long-lasting tactic for kiddos. Another pro is it helps teach basic lessons, provides external motivation, external meaning. It'll get people to do what you want them to do by an external force, right? So that motivation, like you get a treat, you get a reward, that's really the motivation that they have. So that is proven to work. It also asserts control, right? So it's hard with those kids with challenging behavior because you do want to assert your control because you are a parent, you are a teacher, you are whomever to that person, and you are that adult. So you need to be in control, right? And this is a way to do that. Some of the cons that you will see is, like I said, the effectiveness typically decreases after time, like I said, with that sticker chart. It doesn't teach complex thinking skills, right? It doesn't build relationships because oftentimes if you have a challenging kiddo and you try to assert your power, you're going to get a conflict typically, right? When they don't hear or when you don't say what they want them to say or they don't get what they want, you're going to really do a little bit of damage to that relationship. And I'm sure it doesn't feel good for either party. And it doesn't really help kids stay regulated either. Okay. Some side effects of using this traditional type of parenting is it can decrease that internal motivation, right? That internal drive that gets them to want to do and want to comply. It feels as if it's not worth trying, right? So those kids who have all those labels and hear all those negative things aren't necessarily driven to do better. And it also increases a fixed mindset, which can be okay, but as you know, like circumstances happen, things change, and if they learn a pattern where they come to expect things, like not everybody knows that pattern, right? So what is the pattern learned at home? The teachers at school aren't going to know that. So that can lead to more disruptions in the school or with other people. So there's very little empirical evidence to suggest that operant conditioning is effective with children with challenged behavior, and lots of evidence to suggest that it can actually be counterproductive and can trigger the very behavior designated to prevent. So I just think about this. I want you to kind of read through some of these and take a minute here and just kind of think about yourself personally in your life, right? Have you ever spaced out in a meeting, thought you were being criticized, but later realized you were just being defensive, swore in front of a child or colleague when you didn't mean to? I'm glad that you weren't listening when I was kicked out of the webinar, because I definitely did that out of panic. But what this is really wanting you to do is, like, I'm sure that each of you can relate to at least one of these in your typical day as a fully functioning, capable adult, right? So would it be safe to say that if you had these skills listed, that you could have handled those situations better, right? Like if you were paying attention, if you were staying organized, like thinking before you acting, managing your frustration, right? If you had all those skills and you were really, really skilled at these skills, you would be able to implement those to avoid those past behaviors, right? So what this is saying is it safe to say that if you could have handled those situations better, you would have? Which ultimately leads to kids do better if they can, right? Rather than initially kids do better if they want to. So this whole idea is, if they can't do well, something is getting in the way. And we as parents and adults, we need to help figure out what that is so we can help them through that. Challenging kids lack skill, not will. So why? It's challenging kids have critical thinking skills. Challenging kids have difficulty accessing those crucial thinking skills when they need them most. So research shows that challenging kids have one or more of the following skill deficits. I will give some I'll give some examples of each of them just so you can understand. Obviously, these are big fancy words, so I will give you some examples. So when we talk about skill deficit with language and communication, right? So if a kid has those skills, they'd be able to understand spoken direction, understand and follow conversations, express concerns and needs and thoughts in words, and is able to tell someone what's bothering them. If they are very skilled in attention and working memory, some of those examples would be if they're able to stay on task, right? Requiring sustained attention, does things in a logical sequence, keeps track of time, reflects on multiple thoughts or ideas at the same time, maintains focus during activities, ignores irrelevant noise, people, or other stimuli, and considers a range of solutions to one problem. And for emotional self-regulation, if a kiddo is very skilled in this category, what you're going to see is they think rationally, even when frustrated. They manage irritability, anxiety, and disappointment in an age-appropriate way. They think before responding and can adjust their arousal level to meet the demands of the situation. And if there is a skilled kiddo that has cognitive ability, what you're going to see is it handles transition easily, is able to see shades of gray rather than thinking black and white. So that's really thinking outside the box. They think hypothetically, they handle deviations from the rules, routine, and original plans. They handle unpredictability and takes into account situational factors that may change. For example, if you tell your kiddo that tomorrow we're going to go to the park, right? And the next day it turns out that it's raining and you're unable to go. So if you tell a kiddo who's very skilled in this category that, they're going to be able to understand that there are those circumstances and you won't see a disruption in behavior, right? So the last one is social thinking skills. If you have a kiddo who's very skilled in that, you're going to see them able to pay attention to verbal and nonverbal social cues, to accurately interpret nonverbal social cues, to start conversations with peers, to seek attention appropriately, understand how the behavior affects others, understands how they can come across to others, and empathize with others. So those are some examples of each of those categories. And I know a common thing that we kind of see is kiddo, like you hear from parents, like, I've seen them do these things or comply with what I request in the past, so I know he can do it. But there's times where he appears to be unable to do it. And what this means is really applying a skill is dependent on the state and the context. And really what this is saying is context, meaning the circumstance that form the setting for an event, statement or idea. And if a kiddo is not in, like, if they are already disruptive, like dysregulated, essentially, they're going to tend to be more in the bottom part of their brain, right? They're going to be at that fear, flight, all of that, where all rational thinking is kind of thrown out the window, right? So the state, if there's a very disruptive state going on, and the context, really, they're not going to be able to channel those things where they've learned those behaviors before and have them in their upstairs brain, but they're not going to be able to get it if they're already dysregulated, right? Okay. So lagging skills are influenced by several factors here. So we have genetics. They can be passed along to offspring for sure. The environment, the trauma, and chronic stress can also influence this. Okay. So the cycle of chronic stress and trauma and punitive punishment. So that punitive punishment, again, meaning more of that operant conditioning, that negative reinforcement. So what you get is, by providing that to an already dysregulated kid, can cause extra stress, extra dysregulation, right? So not handling it appropriately, which is going to further that skill deficit, And what that's going to do is ultimately lead to more challenging behaviors. And it's really going to go full circle here. And we're not going to get any improvement in those behaviors if we continue to do this with these challenging kiddos. The good news is that new neural connections can occur, right? That means that people's brains are able to form new ways of processing things and learn new things throughout their lifespan, right? So I'm sure you're wondering, how can we as adults help them improve these lagging skills that they have? The one thing that we can do is foster that development of intrinsic motivation. So essentially what that intrinsic motivation is a gamut of things, right? It's competence, it's autonomy, and it's also relatedness. Sorry, just checking my notes real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, right. So competence is really meaning that kiddos feel successful and feel efficient in skills, right? Relatedness is feeling connected with others, and autonomy is ultimately feeling that independence and inner self. So some factors that can help influence intrinsic motivation would be challenge, right? Like the outcome is beneficial to them, but outcome is not predictable, which spikes. So challenging, like kids can really be internally motivated if they feel a drive. Like if there's a challenge, like most people like to have that challenge. And if we go back to that operant conditioning and they learn to expect it, that's not really a challenge for them, right? They know they have to do A, B, C to get the reward. If they don't feel like doing that reward, they're not going to do A, B, C. So challenge, like providing opportunities to challenge your kiddos can really help influence that motivation. And ultimately, it will help with that curiosity piece too, right? And with control, and that doesn't mean when I say control, it doesn't mean let them do whatever they want and run the show. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But what I can tell you is that I've worked with kiddos for quite some time now, and really when there is conflict and when there's crises and when there's all these issues happening within the family, like at all of the core of all of them that I hear is that kids don't feel like they have a self of control, any type of control. And when they don't have control, it feels very vulnerable to them, right? They panic and it feels really yucky, just like anybody else, right? We all kind of want to have some type of control over ourselves and our environment. And if kiddos feel like they don't have that, it's not going to be helpful, right? So cooperation is people feel satisfied when helping others. I don't know, well, I'm a social worker, so obviously that comes without saying, but helping people really drives me to further help people. And I think most people can relate to that. So that is a way that you can help influence that. And recognition, right? So kids like to hear that they're doing good. Positive words are so powerful, right? Instead of going like, this kid is really defiant, try flipping it around and saying this kid is really strong-willed, right? So just try reframing how you talk to your kiddo is really a good way to build on that intrinsic motivation. And ultimately, all of these factors are really at the core of the CPS model that we're talking about. Okay, so now you might ask, how does it work, right? So there's 3 different stages to this. The first stage is the assessment part of it. And so what this Dr. Ablon is saying is that there's 2 ways to respond to stimuli, right? There's a problem. If a kiddo has a sufficient skill, you're going to see adaptable behavior, right? So on the adverse effect, if they're having that lagging skill, that's when you're going to get that challenging behavior. Okay, so our first step would be really identifying that challenging behavior, right? So how do we do this is really going in deep into the situation where there's those difficult moments and those challenging behaviors. You want to ask yourself, like, what is happening in that moment, right? Is there a specific place that seems to trigger where this behavior is happening? Is it more at school? Is it at home? Is it on the bus ride home, right? Looking at who's involved. Is it typically you see those behaviors towards mom, towards a specific teacher, towards a specific peer, really looking at all of that. And it's when, like, I know my kiddos specifically, like if I wake them up early in the morning, they are not morning kiddos. So I see a lot more behaviors, right, than I do in the afternoon. So is it happening more in the morning? Is it happening more at night? Like, what are those patterns and how can we link that together? And asking the why, right? So why is this going on? And what's that antecedent that's going on before that behavior? Like, what's happening and what's that timeline look like to figure out what is going on with this, right? Okay. So again, once you have looked into identifying the who, what, when, where of that challenging behavior, you're going to look at identifying that lagging skill, right? Like, what category does this fall in? Is it they're getting in fights with peers, right? They may have some social thinking skills. They are unable to read how they are seen by others, right? They might not have empathy, or it might be they can't pay attention in school. Maybe they are struggling with attention and working memory skills, and they physically can't. That is their lagging skill, right? So I won't go over all those examples. One thing that I should point out too, you should have access to, I added some handouts that you guys can take a peek at that have a couple that go more in depth in those assessments. So feel free to take a look at any of those throughout this and after. One thing that is really important to point out is that circumstances are not a lagging skill, okay? And when I say that, oftentimes what I hear, like when I ask people to identify that lagging skill, sometimes I hear he has bipolar disorder, right? So that's why there's that behavior. Or she has ADHD, that's why there's that behavior. He was adopted, right? That's why there's that behavior. Her father was never around. Like, those are some common things that you really hear. And those are things, those are factors, absolutely. But those are not lagging skills, okay? So it goes a little bit deeper than that rather than the environmental factors around these that are happening around these kiddos. So once we have identified, and also side note, it doesn't like, kids can have several lagging skills within one behavior. It doesn't have to be like pick one and that's the reason why. They could have several different lagging skills within one behavior. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to identify that. All right, the next one is planning. So planning goals. Okay, so the goals of intervention are going to be, we want to pursue high priority expectations, right? Meaning the ones that are very disruptive, in your face, pretty consistent within the home. We're going to make those the priority, right? Obviously, what our next goal would be, we want to reduce the challenging behavior, right? We want to solve chronic problems durably. We also want to build skills and confidence, aka that intrinsic motivation that I talked about. We want to create and restore a helping relationship between you and your child, or you as an adult and the child that you're interacting with. So Dr. Ablon really kind of, there's essentially three, in a nutshell. I mean, this is pretty simplistic, but there's essentially three ways to intervene with kiddos, right? There's a plan A, plan B, and plan C. Ooh, sorry, just 1 second. Oh God, how did I apologize. I put all my stuff on, all my electronics on mute, but I did not consider that my daughter's tablet was sitting right next to me. So I apologize for that interruption. Okay, so there's a plan A, a plan B, and plan C. So plan A really goes back to that negative reinforcement, right? So it's imposing adult will. So you're going to make them do it regardless. However you do that, you're going to do it because you're the adult, they're the kid. That's the way they need to do. Like, they need to get that, right? Plan B is solve the problem collaboratively. Plan C is drop it, not now, drop it like now at least. And really an example that sticks out in my head that may make a little more sense is like if you go to a store and your kiddo really wants something and all of a sudden they are blowing up, right? So as a parent, I can tell you that's happened to me and it is absolutely mortifying, right? So oftentimes in those moments when we're feeling pressure from society, everybody's looking at you like people are going to think you don't know how to control your kid, right? All of those feelings and emotions that are happening while your kid is losing their crap is overwhelming, right? So the easiest thing to do is give them the toy so they stop, right? And that's something that works, but in that moment, but it's not always effective for really changing that behavior ongoing, because what you're going to get is the next time you go to the store, they know how to get what they want and they're going to do the exact same thing. So really what you're doing is reinforcing that negative behavior you didn't want, right? Okay, so just kind of going through on the side there, I have a list of those goals that we talked about, and just kind of a check chart that we'll go through real quickly. So that plan A, right, that I'm an adult, you're a kid, you're going to do what I say regardless. So the goal here is trying to get your expectations met. And we see plan A. Yeah, I mean, most of the time you can, right? But some of the time you may not. But if you do want to enforce that will, you can absolutely get that, right? Because clearly there are tons of kids out there that have been parented traditionally and turn out completely okay and don't have behaviors, right? But what we're considering right now in this moment is those challenging behaviors in those kiddos right now, those higher need kiddos. It's saying that plan B, collaboratively problem solving, will try to get the expectation met. Yep. And plan C is what it's saying is it's not an effective way, right? Because like I said, in the kid in the shopping mall, essentially what we just did is reinforce that negative behavior, didn't we? Okay. Reduces challenging behavior. And what we go back a few slides, what I talked about is really that what it does is it turns into that cycle, right? It creates that stress, which leads to behaviors, which leads to the same results. Plan A, enforcing parent will, is really not always an effective way to reduce challenging behavior. It's saying that plan B is. And obviously a kiddo who gets a new toy at the shopping mall after losing their crap, they are very happy, right? So it does reduce challenging behavior in those moments, right? But not long-term. Building skills and confidence. So when we're imposing our adult will, what this is saying is that plan A typically is not effective in doing that. Plan B is, and plan C is not. Solving the problem. So plan A really, it solves your problem, right? Like if you get a kid to do what you want to do, that's a win for us parents, right? But what this is saying is plan B, collaborating. It's not rewarding for that kiddo, right? It's not, that kid does not leave that situation satisfied. And what we really want to do is to help make them more satisfied, right? And then the plan C, it does not solve the problem. Like I said, it reinforces it. It builds relationships. So plan A, when there's that hostility, that kid leaves that conflict not satisfied, that obviously isn't building on that relationship. It's saying the collaborative problem solving does do that. And the reason why there's a question mark, on plan C is because in the moment, it might feel like you made her really happy. You made that kid happy that they got that toy and you met that need in that moment. But to be fair, a relationship is far more than toys, right? So that's why it's a question mark, because they may be really happy with you, but as far as that internal deep relationship with your kiddo, it doesn't always meet that need. Okay, so the biggest misconceptions about CPS, it does not mean like anything goes. Like I said, it's not letting your kids have full control, decision making, doing whatever they want. We're not saying that at all. The plans aren't needed until you have an unmet need or expectation, right? So if there's just small inconsistent behaviors here and there, typically that operant way of intervening with those kiddos would be effective, right? But if we can't have unmet expectations if we don't have expectations to begin with, right? So this is really the core of parenting. Like you have as you and as a parent, them as a kiddo, you've laid out some guidelines on expectations that your kids should be aware of, right? If you don't have those set up and structured and really ingrained on the front end, there can't be an unmet expectation, right? Because that kid's not going to know what those are, what those expectations are. Okay, so the final stage is intervention. So when you're intervening, you really need to be realistic with your expectations, right? An example of this, and I have to laugh because I was doing an anger management, a family anger management group a while back. And one of the parents were talking about her son, and she was like, a lot of our conflict is when he gets mad, he goes in his room, he blasts his music, and he does it intentionally. He knows better, right? All of those typical frustrated parent things that we say. And I had to laugh because so her expectation was her response was, turn that down. Like, you know better, don't do that. And the kid, I just enjoyed him so much, but I had to laugh because his response was, I turned it down. I mean, I turned it down like a notch, right? So a little bit of a smart butt, and his mom didn't really appreciate that. But that's really the importance of those clear, concise, in-depth expectations that are laid out on the front end leave far less room for any type of miscommunication on the latter end, right? Because he did kind of comply, maybe to the level or volume that his mom thought was acceptable, but that wasn't really laid out on the front end. So it could have been a lagging skill, right? Like, he didn't understand what she fully meant to, and that's a complete realistic thought as well. So a helping relationship is not built overnight. Like, I am not saying that if you use this, by tomorrow, your kids will be perfect, wonderful, healthy, happy angels, right? So it takes time and it takes work, right? And same with skills. If your kiddo is lagging the skill, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes repetition, it takes time, it takes patience. And so I don't want you to think that this is something that's going to fix your kid and every situation that happens is going to be happy and wonderful. It takes work. So I do encourage you to be patient and be realistic. Okay, so one fact is that challenging behaviors are highly predictable. If you go back, when you are identifying that challenging behavior, and go back to the who, what, when, where, why, right? So if you really dive into that and look into that, behaviors can be pretty, you can kind of guess when behaviors are going to be escalated, right? So it's really important to have that understanding on the front end when you're approaching these things, because what you really want to do is identifying those behaviors on the front end, understanding where they're coming from, get some ideas about where they're all coming from, can ultimately lead to having a plan set up on the front end. So when there is a crisis, that you have that plan in place, right? Obviously, I'm not saying that when there's a crisis, go ahead and think about plan A, plan B, look at the who, what, when, where, and why. In those moments, obviously, a parent does not have the time to go through this and think it out. So it's really important for you guys to try to be proactive with this and identify those behaviors on the front end, not in the moment, okay? Okay, so the ingredients for Plan B is, the first one is empathize, and that's clarifying child's concerns. The second is share adult concerns. And the third is collaborate, meaning brainstorming, assessing, and choosing a solution. Where's my little mouse? Okay. Okay. So the empathizing piece, this is clarifying child concerns, right? So it's really important, like I said, giving some kids control, kids feeling like they're being heard, right? So start with a neutral observation, right? So I noticed that you seemed pretty pretty worked up or you were a little off when you got home from school. And then the simple response to that is what's going on? Or it seems like you really struggle when I ask you to do this certain task. Like, tell me more about that and tell me what's going on. And really approaching it in a light, curious way is helpful. Obviously, you're going to have kiddos who are not interested in talking at that moment. So feel free to incorporate, like, you don't have to be like, tell me what's going on. Why are you being such a jerk? Because, right, that's not going to work. You're not going to get a response, right? So some tips for starting out on the right foot here is state the problem to be solved and not starting with the challenging behavior, right? So don't say that you're doing A, B, C, what's up, right? Like I said, that's going to close the conversation down really quickly. And sticking with the facts and externalizing the problem the best that you can is really a nice, safe, soft way to approach those behaviors in those moments. Instead of blaming or assuming that you know why they're doing this, rolling your eyes, right? Like, they do this all the time. So us as parents are not always the most sensitive to the kids because we're obviously dysregulated from the behaviors that we're dealing with. So that's completely understandable. But by externalizing, talking about the environment, the factors, instead of focusing more on that kid and what's happening in those moments and focusing on their throwing stuff or doing stuff, is going to be a more effective approach to handling those kids and getting them to talk and really tell you about what's going on, okay? Okay, so like I said, kiddos aren't always going to be in a mentality where they're initially going to be willing to openly talk, right? So some of the tips that you can do is really asking clarifying questions, because I know that this is a really powerful tool in counseling, right? So repeating, like, making sure that you're actively listening is really important, and that's doing it with like your nonverbals as well, making sure you're making eye contact, nodding, being really understanding. And once they've stated, like, if they state something, it's helpful for the kids a lot of times to repeat it back, right? So they say, I don't want to do that because the rules are stupid. Okay, so that might come out of your kid's mouth. And what I mean by reflective listening and clarifying question, just be like, okay, so I understand where you're coming from. So what you're saying is that you don't like any rules, right? And sometimes when people, if you repeat what they say back to them, it gets them to think about it a little more. And it kind of challenges, because sometimes people are like, oh, well, I didn't mean it to come out like that, right? Like, maybe they didn't have that self-awareness that that's how it's coming out. So repeating it back to them is sometimes a helpful tool. And ultimately approaching it again in a reassuring way, and not in like a poking, prodding. It says drilling for information, but you really want to make sure that you're setting an environment where it's like, I really want to understand what's going on. I want to help you through this. You are not going to get in trouble for what you say as long as you're being open and honest with me. So really reassuring those kiddos that this is a safe place, and they really have the floor to share their concerns and anything that they want to in those moments. Okay, so once we have heard all of the issues and things that the problems that the kids have with what's going on, right? We let them vent. They have stated everything. You get a pretty good idea of where they're coming from if you fully do listen and understand to your kiddos. The next step would be to share your concerns, right? So really being specific as possible, right? And a lot of times, a safe way to approach this is relating it to a meaningful theme, right? So safety, health, learning, and impacting others are really some core things that you can reference, right? Like, I really get concerned when you're punching holes in the wall, or you're destroying your room, or you're running away from home because I'm worried about your safety, or I'm worried about the safety of your sister when you're very upset like that, right? I'm worried about the behaviors in school because I don't want it to affect your learning, right? Or I don't want it to impact others' behaviors. Those 4 are really good core places to try to relate your concerns to that will be less stressful for the kid to hear, right? Obviously, they're less likely to get worked up and get defensive if you are really talking about that the core is that you are concerned, right? So starting concern with, it's important to note, I know the last time I did this, I said, I started out the quote unquotes with but, which says right on the bottom that you should not do that. So I thought that was a little funny. But when you're starting those conversations and you're giving your side of what's going on, avoiding but, because what that does is ultimately just kind of supersedes what that kid is hearing is like, what they just said is not valid. They didn't hear me, because whatever they're going to say, it's going to trump over like what I said doesn't matter anyways. Really, it's a good way to switch that, like get that reaction. The kids get frustrated, the kids get worked up, they don't feel like they were heard, right? So starting it with, and the thing is, like, so, and my concern is, right? So avoid using but at all costs when you are starting that conversation. Yep. Just don't do it like I did the last one. Okay. So adult concerns are predictably dysregulating. And what I say by that is, like, obviously you're stating your concern, and no matter how, like, some kiddos might respond to that really well, but some kiddos, no matter how you word it or what you say, they're not going to want to hear what you're saying, right? So it may be dysregulating for that kid, right? So it's really, it's helpful in obviously a controlled circumstance. And obviously if they're not doing any safety concerns in those moments when they are dysregulated, but it's proven that small little stressors that occur with a kiddo is ultimately a way to help them heal and deal with those stressors better in the future. That's a fact that we have learned. So, and also just note that if a kiddo gets to the place where they are super dysregulated, when you tell them your concerns, it's a pretty fluid line here. You can move back to the kid's concern, right? So you can jump back and say, okay, so I see that you are really struggling right now. Tell me about that. You can get their concerns again about this new situation that's happening, and then you can move on. It's really a fluid thing. It doesn't have to be A, B, C is going to happen. You can really try to meet your needs and the kiddos' needs, and jump back and forth and go back as much as you really need to. Like I said, this takes practice and it takes skill, but I have all the confidence in the world that you can do it. So collaborate is the final step. It's brainstorm, assess, and choose a solution. So really in this setting, what you want to start out with is encourage your kids to think of solutions. And I laugh by the picture because it says there's no such thing as a bad idea, and she lit the house on fire, right? Obviously, we hope that that's not a suggestion or solution from your kids, because that'd be slightly extreme. But even if you are getting these really extreme responses, like, how do you think we can fix this? Like, processing with them, what do you think's going to work? Like, how do you think we can stop this from happening in the future? You're going to get some ridiculous responses, right? You're going to get, well, there shouldn't be any rules, or I should be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. That would fix everything, right? Like, you can get those typical adolescent responses for sure. The hardest thing for parents is in this process is you got to bite your tongue, right? Like, so no idea is a bad idea, right? So just letting them know, like, no, being aware of your your nonverbals, like, don't roll your eyes, make sure make sure that you're hearing them out, being enthusiastic, optimistic, regardless of the response that you get. The core of this process is to make kids feel like they have some power in this. And if they feel like they're being heard, then that's what we're doing. That's what we're building the skills, right? Again, ridiculous ideas. I've heard several, but just make sure that you are aware. You hear them out. You're curious. You're excited. You bite your tongue, okay? As hard as it may be. Okay. So once you and your kiddo have sat down and really threw all these suggestions out there, like you gave your insight on how you could do it, they gave their insight, you have a solid list of how to fix these concerns and all these solutions, right? So a way to kind of check it is to ask yourself, and you can absolutely do this as a team. I would encourage you to do it with your kiddo. Like, ask yourself these questions. Does it identify, like, meet the kid's concerns, right? Does it address your concerns? Is it doable and realistic? Right? Obviously, throwing out all rules probably isn't the most realistic thing. So if we do that, will it bring up any additional concerns? So thinking about the potential risks of allowing this idea, right? And then when can we talk? When can we talk again to see how it works? Because it's always important to go back and reassess these things that you implement right together. So plugging each of those ideas into here is a really good way to kind of rule out. I think in parents' minds, they probably don't have to do this, but the power of doing it together again is really giving that kid some control and making them feel like they're heard. So that's the key concept here, that we're really trying to build that skill and making them feel like they're an active member in this decision making. And to be fair, they're like, some of the parents solutions might not be realistic if you plug them into here too, right? Like, doing what I say when I say it isn't going to meet the kids' concerns, right? So even if one thing that I would encourage you to do if you are going to try to do this with your kiddo is even put some put some unrealistic adult ones, like knowingly, like some off the wall solutions, like throw some out there with your kiddo just so they can see that you are a person too, right? So it's really a good way to build relationships. Like, we all are not perfect people, so feel free to actively throw some ridiculous solutions in there to plug in, because it will be helpful. Okay. So what you'll learn about all of this when you are implementing these things, when you're doing the collaborative thing with your kiddo, and in those moments when your kid's getting worked up, I can tell you that I am absolutely guilty of it, where I'm going to respond in yelling. Like, I'm not going to handle those situations really better, or I'm not going to handle them better, excuse me. But ultimately, that means that I maybe have some lagging skills too, right? We are humans and we are people, and nobody is perfect. So you might start to think about your lagging skills. But the more we practice this, it's a good way to improve skills for everybody. And what I can tell you is, once you kind of master this tactic, it ultimately applies to all of your interactions with people. It can be applied to your personal relationships, right? Like, if you implement this, do it to any type of family conflict or anything like that. It does not have to be specific to your kids, because it's really just an effective way to communicate and problem solve with people in general. Okay. So adults do well if they can, right? So not only kids do well if they can, it's adults do well if we can, because we are learning and changing with our kiddos too. Okay, so I am all done, guys. I appreciate you hanging in there. I apologize that you're a little late because of my technical difficulties, but if you have any quick questions that you wanted to add, you wanted to ask or anything, feel free to do that quickly. I'll just give it a minute here. If you prefer that, instead of using that chat box, what I will do at this time, if I can see, is so I will give you is ability to unmute yourself if anybody has any questions, but if not, that's completely okay. That means I did a really great job, right? It's also worth noting that if you guys want the handouts, feel free to let me know and I can email those to you too, because I know that they might go away after. I will send you all the attendees to go ahead and I believe after I exit out, you guys will get a follow-up email. If you could just take a look, keep an eye out for that. It's just a survey because obviously I always want to do better, especially with technical difficulties, clearly. But if you guys have any tips or you have any opinions, like your feedback is really important to help us improve these and make these better. So I would appreciate if you take a couple minutes to fill those out. But yes, I think that we will go ahead and exit out. Thank you so much for attending, and I appreciate it. And you guys have a lovely evening, and look in your emails after. Thanks.